The empire's mass roundups and deportations of immigrants from Mexico is focused most intensely in lands stolen from Mexico. Those who die in the desert do so to get to a place once under the Mexican flag. Mexico's territory once stretched the southwest of what is now the United States, so large it covered what is today Texas, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, New Mexico, and California. Over 30,000 Mexicans lived in the area that is now New Mexico. Previously colonized by the Spanish Empire, the Mexican people won hard-fought independence in 1821. But anytime one empire is driven out, the vultures of another one began circling the newly freed nation. For manifest destiny marching west, Texas became the first battleground in the U.S. expansion in 1935. After Mexico abolished slavery in its territories, white settlers drove out Mexican forces and liberated Texas for slave owners. A decade later, they set out to conquer vast swaths of territory from Mexico. The Mexican-American War became the first time U.S. troops were sent to fight on foreign soil. Leading abolitionist Frederick Douglass said of the war, "In the murder of Mexicans upon their own soil, or in robbing them of their country, I can take no part either now or hereafter." Many, including Henry David Thoreau, went to jail for refusing to pay taxes in protest of the war. In 1847, after 11 years of bloody battles, U.S. generals invaded and occupied Mexico City and secured the formal surrender of half of Mexico's northern territory, negotiated at the barrel of a gun. A new United States was born, carved by the swords of army officers, and the conquest of Mexican territory brought with it a new racist rule. In California, a whites-only constitution was employed. So began the legal assault of Mexicans living in what was their country. The burgeoning U.S. empire continued to shape Mexico's future. In 1910, the Mexican people began rebelling against a 35-year president, General Porfirio Diaz, who would let the U.S. and British capitalists plunder Mexico at the great expense of the Mexican people. When revolutionary Francisco Madero unseated Diaz's rule in 1911, the U.S. assisted in his assassination and a military coup. Among U.S. actions to ensure those friendly to U.S. business interests won out in the Mexican Revolution, President Woodrow Wilson bombed and occupied the port of Veracruz. By 1918, Nogales, a city split in two by the empire's new border, became a center of tensions, defined by dehumanizing and repressive treatment by U.S. forces. In one incident, an American soldier fired a shot while harassing a Mexican carpenter, setting off a major battle. As American troops invaded the Mexican side of Nogales as punishment, militiamen and civilians took up arms to repel them. The bloodshed came to a head when the mayor of Nogales, Felix B. Penaloza, came out with a white flag tied to a cane, calling on everyone to stop shooting. American forces shot the mayor dead. With that act, the terrorized leaders in Mexico surrendered, and the first permanent U.S. border fence was built. Not only does that wall remain today, but it's become an obscene scar that cuts a community in two. The population of Nogales, Arizona is 95% Latino, and it's historically linked to its sister city across the street. But since September 11, 2001, Border Patrol has treated it like a war zone, as if they were soldiers guarding an outpost in Afghanistan. Since the border militarization, families divided by the wall have had to resort to visiting each other through the bars, the only way they can see and touch each other, despite living right next door. But even these caged reunions offend the cruelty of Border Patrol agents. When we went to the wall, approaching it within 10 feet was off limits. To find out more about how this ominous structure became what it is today, we spoke to Todd Miller. author of Border Patrol Nation, Dispatches from the Front Lines of Homeland Security.
Well, you could go back to 1924. That's when the Border Patrol was created. But for the first 70 years of its existence, all the way to 1994, they went from about 100 agents to 4,000 agents. This wall that we're looking at right here did not exist. It was a chain link fence. There's a lot of holes in it. There wasn't the technology that you see today. And then in the mid-1990s, actually this wall that is right behind us was constructed in March of 1994. And for many people know that's 2 months after the implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement.
We have made a decision now that will permit us to create an economic order in the world that will promote more growth, more equality, better preservation of the environment, and a greater possibility of world peace.
The initiation of NAFTA in 1994, pushed under the guise of a free trade partnership with Mexico that would bolster the economy and curb immigration, did just the opposite. Heavily subsidized U.S. crops flooding in drove production down and consumer prices up. New corporations dominating the market collapsed small businesses across the country. Sweatshop labor surged. 28,000 small and medium-sized Mexican businesses were destroyed in NAFTA's first 4 years. The price of corn, Mexico's main staple, fell by 66%, ejecting at least 2 million small farmers from their land, forced to migrate north in search of life-sustaining work. NAFTA's model of neoliberal development forever stunts Mexico's food independence. In post-NAFTA Mexico, 42% of the food consumed comes in from abroad. As a result of this terrible policy, about 22 million Mexicans in a country of 122 million live in food poverty. The number of undocumented immigrants coming to America has increased a dramatic 185%, from 3.9 million in 1992 to 11.1 million in 2011.
What was called Operation Hold the Line, Operation Gatekeeper, and here Operation Safeguard were these three, operations that were put into place along the 2,000-mile U.S. Mexico border, right at the implementation of NAFTA, in anticipation of this upsurge of immigration, to then seal off the border in places that were traditional crossing places.
Before 9/11, there were 9,000 Border Patrol agents working America's border. But newly minted DHS funds have pumped it up to the largest law enforcement agency in the U.S., with about 46,000 agents. Under President Clinton, the funds for Border Patrol exponentially increased, skyrocketing under the Obama administration. Now, the annual budget stands at an insane $12.4 billion. What kind of technology was concentrated here at that time?
It first started with the wall, of course, and then there's camera posts that they would put along the border. You can see them, maybe every kilometer or half a kilometer. They're implanted motion sensors. So we could be standing on an implanted motion sensor right now as we talk. We might be triggering it, and it will beep in a Border Patrol station a couple miles away from here. There's 12,000 motion sensors implanted right now below the surface along the U.S. Mexico border, but also inland as well. They're, all kinds of sophisticated cameras, not just night vision cameras, body thermal energy cameras. It's kind of like there's a technological, I would call it a fortress to accompany this increase in personnel.
What is the Pentagon's strategy of low-intensity warfare, and how does it apply here at the border?
This is being applied on the border, essentially treating the border as a war zone, right? Where there's no war. There's no war here. So in a sense, one of the big aspects of such a low intensity war doctrine is the creation of fear, and you can see that all around. Like just this wall alone behind us creates a sense of fear, right? Like if a child sees a wall, a child thinks, well, what's on the other side of the wall? There must be something bad on the other side of the wall. There must be something we must fear on the other side of the wall. And this idea of good and bad, innocent, criminal, non-terrorist, terrorist, all this dichotomy is created. And so what we have here is kind of this war, this creation of a low-intensity war zone under what is called a prevention by deterrence strategy.
The strategy of death by deterrence is perhaps most prevalent in the Sasabe corridor, otherwise known as the Corridor of Death, where smugglers opt to bring migrants to evade Border Patrol. The treacherous landmass encapsulates the Babo Kiveri Mountains. The death-defying trek doesn't stop tens of thousands of people from crossing through these mountains every year. The small, heavily militarized border town of Aravaca falls in between the corridor where migrants are funneled to die. Living with this human tragedy, several community organizations have mobilized to provide life-saving aid. Reagan Wendell, Aravaca volunteer with People Helping People in the Border Zone, talks about the deaths in her backyard.
People have been murdered by Border Patrol, but on a regular basis, on a daily basis, there's not like tons of gunfire going on. But people are being murdered. And it's very clever, and it's very cunning, and it's very hidden. And I think that's the thing about it that is different from other war zones that maybe one has been in or sees on TV. It's not obvious, but it's very ruthless and almost, sometimes I think, more scary because it's so hidden.
The war becomes more visible when Border Patrol agents murder people. Like 16-year-old Jose Antonio Elena Rodriguez, who was shot dead by a Border Patrol agent through the wall in Nogales, Mexico in October of 2012. Witnesses say he was simply walking home from basketball practice when Agent Lonnie Ray Swartz shot 12 rounds through the bars, hitting the young teen 10 times. Accused of being a threat to the agent's life, 8 of the shots hit Jose in the back. Jose's mother, Araceli Rodriguez, remembers her son as a passionate child eager to see the world.
Pues fue el momento más triste que hemos vivido toda la familia. Yo principalmente como mamá, me hace mucha falta mi hijo. Que las personas que decidieron juzgar a esta persona son personas con valores, son personas inteligentes, son personas que se pusieron en mi lugar, son personas que saben que no se vale meter la mano por la línea, por el cerco y matar a niños mexicanos. No se vale asesinar por asesinar, porque no estamos en territorio de guerra, no estamos en guerra. Ellos deben de respetar las leyes. Se supone que por eso hay leyes. Ellos no tenían ningún derecho, ningún motivo para matarlo de esa manera. Yo siento que las personas que decidieron juzgarlo es porque saben que es culpable. Yo la vez que vi por primera vez al asesino de mi hijo, lo primero que se me vino a la mente fue cómo ese hombre tan grande, cómo esa persona tan adulta, tan grande, o sea, cómo pudo haber tenido miedo de mi hijo. O sea, ¿quién le va a creer? O sea, apenas, ¿quién le va a creer a esa persona que su vida estaba en peligro? O sea, ¿cómo? No, es de no creerse. O sea, ¿cómo le van a creer a esa persona que su vida estaba en peligro si José Antonio no estaba armado?
Swartz tried to claim his life was in danger, then tried to avert charges based on constitutional immunity. But relentless grassroots pressure wouldn't let him get away with murdering a child, and forced his indictment. The first officer to be charged with a cross-border shooting in U.S. history. One fact about the incident that Lonnie Swartz couldn't lie away was that he emptied his clip, reloaded, and continued shooting at Jose's collapsed body, an act incomprehensible to justify as anything other than an execution. But dozens of other families who have lost loved ones at the hands of Border Patrol haven't seen a sliver of justice. Since 2010, border agents have shot and killed at least 28 people. In 9 of the killings, Border Patrol justified lethal force by accusing the victims of throwing rocks. Hard to understand the threat considering the rock would have to be launched over a 50-foot high wall to get near anyone. In a review of 67 shootings, it was found that Border Patrol used a tactic of intentionally stepping in front of moving vehicles to justify shooting the driver. Not a single known plaintiff in a wrongful death case against a CPD agent has won a favorable judgment by a judge or jury. In the one case with a trial judgment, the judge found that CPD agent acted in self-defense. It's not just unaccountable murder, it's rampant brutality and sexual assault. In 2014, CPD officer Esteban Manzanares kidnapped and brutally raped 3 Honduran women who were flagging him down for help. He was only caught because one of the women escaped to authorities, bloodied and bound. From theft to drug trafficking, the engorged federal agency has become notorious for unchecked abuse and corruption. Between 2005 and 2012, nearly 1 CPD officer was arrested for misconduct every single day. Communities live in constant fear of Border Patrol and under the shadow of the looming wall separating generations of families. Students we met from Mexicayotl Academy in Nogales talk about their dystopic reality.
It's sad to know that because of a border, my family and I are separated, and that I can only go see them in occasions when I could have them here next to me every day.
The U.S. Is supposedly buying new technology from the Israelis, so they're gonna establish it so Mexicans won't cross, to protect the U.S.
They call it virtual fence. Well, that makes you know that no one's safe. You could just be walking by the street here, and then suddenly a border patrol could say, "Oh, you're smuggling drugs." Boom.
If you look at U.S. empire, and you can look at U.S. empire in terms of U.S. interests, where U.S. economic interests are, military interests, or political interests, and it extends, So when you look at the United States in that sense, it's much bigger. It's a much bigger territory. In Central America, is a perfect example, and there's so much immigration is coming from Central America, but it's a perfect example of economic policy and militarization coming to a head, like Guatemala, United Fruit. Really minor reforms by a president in Guatemala in 1954, boom, coup, a U.S.-sponsored coup comes up and removes that president, puts in a military dictatorship that lasts the next 40 years, right? The war in Guatemala, the kind of what they call a civil war, armed conflict, is very much defines this kind of imposed economic system and militarization system that the U.S., is very much a part of. And then instead of reconciling that, instead of looking for some sort of new way of going about things, what we've done, from immigration, when you think of immigration, there's many complicated reasons why people leave, and it's a very difficult thing for people to do. It's a very intimate decision for people to leave their families, their communities, the food they love, the language they speak, the people they love. It's not an easy thing for people to do. So when people do that, it comes from, real reasons around livelihood. It's usually a big sacrifice for their families, like thinking about their children going to school or even feeding their children. And so for the reaction to be like, for people coming north to build these walls and make their journey very deadly, because of socioeconomic reasons and reasons of intense sacrifice normally for families is something it's really kind of mind-blowing that this is happening, but it is. Here it is, and one of the reasons it does happen is because it's almost like the U.S. public is conditioned to think that this is protection, right? We're being protected by some sort of bad person or bad people that are out to get us, to steal things from us and whatnot. And the reality of the situation, it's the exact opposite. The United States, by its policies, have gone into places, stolen resources from people in many different cases, made it life really difficult for people to live, and then they migrate to the United States.
Hay leyes que dan libre tránsito a las cosas, pero marginan a las personas. Como hay tratados para aligerar las fronteras y puedan haber cruces rápidos, muy seguros para las cosas. Y cómo esos gobiernos que quieren esas leyes para las cosas de que se faciliten y puedan ir de una parte a otra con toda la facilidad, ellos mismos son los que ponen muros y hacen leyes que impiden el libre tránsito de los hombres y mujeres de nuestras comunidades. Ellos mismos provocan la expulsión de los pueblos. Ellos provocan esta migración que se da hoy, que es una forma de esclavitud moderna.
The economic devastation by NAFTA would have caused a refugee crisis on its own. But the empire's dirty wars across Latin America, in places like El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, have compounded it. The U.S. government has puppeted the most brutal dictators and death squads, only to deport the people fleeing the violence they created, even when deportation means death upon return. When the U.S. government wasn't waging war on populist movements, it was using drugs as the premise for military intervention. In Mexico, the bogus war on drugs has exploded to horrific proportions, where warring cartels and drug lords terrorize communities with near impunity. Between 2001 and 2014, there were more than 164,000 murders. U.S. drug policy that helped drug lords grow powerful, and Mexico's heavy violence to regulate them, is responsible for the blood-soaked crisis that so many are fleeing today. The big lie by the empire's rulers is that they don't want undocumented immigrants. See, in 2012, undocumented workers paid $11.8 billion in taxes, while the world's biggest corporations paid zero. But it goes far beyond money reaped from taxes. If all 11 million undocumented immigrants were removed from the U.S. today, it's estimated that the GDP would decline by a whopping $1.6 trillion. Businesses with undocumented workers make bonus profits by paying less than minimum wage and averting all standards for benefits and working conditions. Some industries survive off them primarily. The most profitable sector of the economy, agribusiness, uses more than 70% immigrant labor. About half are undocumented. And the use of undocumented labor allows the big capitalists to keep wages low across the board for all people who work in the U.S. The reality is, the entire unjust, draconian system against immigrants could be ended sensibly by granting legal rights to everyone working in the U.S. It's not without precedent.
I believe in the idea of amnesty.
In 1986, sweeping amnesty was granted under Reagan to nearly 3 million undocumented workers. And as Bloomberg Business reports, more than 2 decades of research show that the 1986 law raised wages and helped lift the economy. The empire needs its millions of undocumented, but it also wants a heavy hand to keep these super exploited workers from standing up. They make easy scapegoats, too, when politicians have no other answers for the problems they've created. But all of the assault rifles, chains, and prisons can't hold back the tide of justice. Since the election of Obama, undocumented youth have led the movement against deportations and raids. With so much at stake for getting arrested, they've carried out civil disobedience actions across the country that have blocked ICE buses and streets. They do so under a brave slogan: undocumented and unafraid. But immigrants' true power was demonstrated most on May 1st, 2006, when they led the largest protest ever in U.S. history. 2 million took to the streets in response to a new anti-immigrant law. Millions more participated in a nationwide strike. A wave of actions shook the country for months. Big business in Washington are well aware of the sleeping giant in the U.S. economy. The people who they exploit, attack, and round up are the ones with the most power to change the system. In a country divided by a wall of racism, there are 2 sides. One that stands against the vicious injustice by a government that creates misery, then punishes its victims, and the other that will die in the dustbin of history.